Hello and welcome to Talking Events. Today's episode is being recorded in the plush and palatial surroundings of Twickenham Stadium. We were given an invitation by the event and the hospitality team here, the Twickenham Experience, to come and actually record the podcasts in one of the hospitality boxes that overlook the pitch. And at this point, we would like to say a big thank you to the team here at the stadium who have been fantastic in hosting us and allowing us to set up for the last couple of days and record these episodes. We welcome today's guests to the podcast, returning to Talking Events. He was on last week talking individually, but on the panel today is James Anderson from Arena Group. Welcome back to the studio, James. Nick Kenton from Lord's Cricket Ground. Nick, thanks for joining Talking Events today. And James Lee from the Twickenham Experience. James, thanks for walking around the corner, I suppose, from your office, and
that's a pleasure.
And popping up to this fine hospitality suite to join us today. We're going to be talking and getting the chaps involved in discussing sporting venues and how a lot of sporting venues now are able to adapt in order to host different types of event. And by adapting, we mean, I suppose, expanding the facilities or enhancing what they've got on a permanent basis in order to cope with either major events that are relevant directly to their type of venue, or indeed events that are being commissioned by other agencies that are non-related to their particular types of sport. So, Nick, let's start with you, and let's start with Lord's Cricket Ground, the facilities that you've got there, but how the ground and how the organisation has expanded those facilities and what you can now accommodate there.
Yeah, I'll give you a bit of an overview to start with. Lord's Cricket Ground really opened up for events around 12 years ago. We host around 60 days of cricket a year, of which 11 days will be international cricket, the rest would be domestic matches. So quite clearly there's a lot of days there that the venue was sitting empty. You've got beautiful venues like the Long Room in the Grade 2 listed Pavilion building, very iconic venue in sport, and it was sitting empty. So it became more and more apparent that Lords needed to move with the times a little bit and make the venues available for people to hire on non-match days. We've had some purpose-built venues since then, the Thomas Lord Suite, and the other venue that's particularly iconic at Lords is the JP Morgan Media Centre that was actually built in 1999, but it now also undergoes around 100 events every single year. Lords is a venue, people know it as the home of cricket. It's a fantastic place for me as the head of sales to sell and get people to come and enjoy the facilities. But we've got that very nice mix of the history as well as the modern facilities like the Thomas Lord Suite and the Media Centre. So we've got that nice mix. We're not a purpose-built stand like we are in the beautiful Twickenham Stadium at the moment in a fantastic facilities that they have here. With Lords, we've got that kind of mix between the very old and the new, and that works really well in terms of proposing that to the events market.
And James Lee from Twickenham Experience, on a previous episode, we've actually spoken about how modern stadia have such a range of facilities that are available here. You've got quite a wealth of on-site facilities, but how has that been expanded in recent years to accommodate different types of events?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and there's been considerable investment in the stadium, not least of which for a rather big tournament that took place towards the end of last year. It's well documented that lots of money was spent in the region of £75 million developing the infrastructure of the stadium, and in particular the West Stand, which is now our sort of premium space. In terms of the history of Twickenham Experience, really, from a conference and event point of view, it kicked off in sort of 2008-9. And the development of the new South Stand. And from there, it's developed really. People know us for the dedicated conference centre that is the South Stand, but more and more people now are being introduced to the rest of the Stadium Bowl, and there's space all around. And I think that's what makes not just Twickenham, but other stadia and sporting venues quite adaptable in terms of the events that we can host. Clearly, many of us do hospitality, and that's what drives the business. And certainly in Twickenham's case, C&E is still a small part of the overall business, but a dynamic one. And with the new space, with the investment that we get, the future looks really bright. Certainly for us as a venue in terms of match day growth, we are restricted or limited by the number of, a bit like Nick was just saying, by the number of fixtures that we can host here in terms of sporting fixtures. So it's really dependent on the C&E side of the business to therefore kick in and help out with the other. In our case, it's more like 340 something days a year.
Right.
And it's true to say, I think that the traditional venue, which might be perceived as hotel, conference centre, people are looking for new and quirkier space. With technology doing what technology is doing, you know, we all have to be alive to that. And I think sport leads the way in so many instances. So for us, we're benefiting from both internal investment from the RFU, and that continues, but also the growth and expansion of the team and the customers that we're looking to attract.
Let's bring James Anderson from Arena Group into this now. James, I think for those that are listening who are not aware of what Arena Group do, give us a quick overview of how you would work with sporting venues such as these.
We work with both these guys actually. So at Lords we build ticket sales at Lords are, you know, everybody wants to go. So spaces at a premium, and we build about 340 extra seats for these guys through the year, which enables them to grow their revenues. For Twickenham, we did a huge amount for the Rugby World Cup. So we built like a 3,000 square metre bespoke media centre that held 600 media personnel. You don't have that sort of stuff on site. 10,000 square metres of temporary roadways. So for us, it's about helping existing venues do exactly what James just said. So yes, they do their core business, but what else can they do? What other events can they run? And what we do is help them by building different infrastructure around the site to help them achieve what they need to achieve. So
supporting their core sporting events, but also allowing them to develop other event offerings.
Absolutely, you know, so turning this into, if you look at Hampton, I think it's Hampton Park at the Commonwealth Games. The venue was turned into a football ground, into a major with a running track and everything, literally by putting a deck area in there, making the overall footprint of the ground much bigger. All temporary. So you know, so it's adding on to what they deliver here.
Is there any scope in Nick and James Lee? Is there scope within both of your venues to actually put any of these sort of services in on a permanent basis, or is it more cost effective to actually bring in companies like Arena Group to deploy temporary elements as and when you need it?
It's a tricky one to answer. Lords is very limited in terms of the space that we have on site. We have residents, everything else, so I don't think it would be particularly straightforward for us to create something that would necessarily be appropriate for an event that would be there throughout the year. Certainly from the match day side of the business, we do create additional seats, as James was mentioning, to accommodate the demand for tickets, and also we do put a hospitality structure up. For example, we had the Ashes Club up during last year for the England-Australia Investec test at Lords, and that accommodated an additional 200 hospitality guests per day. So you can imagine in a year like England versus Australia, that's serious value for the club to be able to do that. Personally, I can see it working maybe at some venues, but at Lords, I would see it has to be a temporary solution that goes in and out, and very much around the match day.
Could I just chip in there? I think it's a very good point. If you consider let's choose the Cheltenham Festival as a good example. For that week, Cheltenham probably make, I would suggest, 75% of their revenue throughout the year. We happen to build the longest triple decker in the world there, which is alongside the course. They could not afford to have that built permanent, and because not only of the initial build cost of that, but the maintenance, the ongoing cost of that building, plus planning and all that sort of stuff. So to put that sort of building up for a temporary basis just for that one event it's far more cost effective for them. And for most of the venues where we build temporary infrastructure, that is the sole reason why they do it. You know, they can get a huge amount of their revenue in that one event.
That's I suppose partially true for you, James Lee, in the sense that you will have requirements from clients that say, look, we need a slightly different space than the one you've got permanently here, can we do something? But equally you'll be trying to incorporate that with elements that you've got here as well.
Absolutely right. So I think, as James has said earlier, The opportunity for us to partner with a company like James is certainly around those big events external to the bowl itself. I think from a C&E point of view internally, there's still so much variety and space that sometimes goes underutilised that there's a lot more that we can offer internally. But I think there's a requirement sort of for both. And it's more from an RFU point of view, from the big matches point of view. I think that's where the opportunity lies. Certainly from an internal point of view with us, there's a huge degree of flexibility in terms of the space that we can offer. And it's about us engaging with clients and making sure that we really understand their objectives for the event, and that we're showing them all of the spaces possible so that they get the best possible outcome.
But both of the venues relevant to the chaps in the studio are venues with rich history with their respective sports, particularly with Lords, Nick. When the decision was made to start utilising the spaces that were available on a more frequent basis outside of the key sporting fixtures, how difficult was it to get that past the members, the management at that particular venue? Was it a hard sell, or was it something that they thought, actually, from a revenue point of view, we really need to do this?
It's before my time when all the decisions were made. The club were hosting events; they just weren't particularly proactive about it. So that was the real shift. And in 2005, the club decided to bring the catering in-house. So that is now delivered exclusively by the MCC. And that, I think, was the real shift for us in terms of having to create that infrastructure, in terms of a sales team, operations team, kitchen staff, etc., all permanently then employed by the MCC. And from what I understand, it wasn't a difficult sell. Lords and the MCC are very much about having control over the customer experience, and that's what they wanted to do. So yes, if you get it right, the rewards are there. And but we of course need to listen to what our members want as well. We are a private members club at the end of the day, and I think I can't speak on behalf of the members. From what I understand, I think people are pleased that the venue such as ours is being used far more frequently than it was 10, 15 years ago.
James Anderson, when Arena Group are developing their own portfolio of actual products and hardware, how mindful are you of the level that's been invested in the permanent infrastructure in both of these venues and venues like these, and the level of quality that's being offered? And as we've said, we're sat in a hospitality suite at the moment, which is immaculate. It's a lovely facility. Have you had to work hard to make sure that the temporary stuff that's going in matches the level of expectation that people would see on a normal basis in those venues?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're paying, I don't know, £1,000 a seat or whatever to go to some of these top sporting events, and you're in a temporary venue, it's got to be better than the permanent than the permanent buildings. And we spend a huge amount of time designing with the venue, designing the interiors. It's more, the buildings are the buildings fundamentally. It's the interior design, it's what they look like, it's the touch and feel, and it's the whole experience of when they walk into a temporary building. It doesn't look like a temporary building. It looks like it's been there for years and years and years, and it's right and it's right on edge. And the difference between how the beauty of doing it temporary is that every year we can change. Every year we do different interior designs. Because it fundamentally it doesn't get thrown away, but it fundamentally gets reused year on year, but in a different way.
James Lee, how important is that creative process for you when you are looking to expand outside of your permanent venues and the permanent offerings that you've got here? How involved are you in working with companies like Arena and other suppliers in terms of looking at how creative you can be and in constantly improving that temporary offering?
Well, from a Twickenham experience perspective, we're concentrating really on those internal spaces.
Right.
It would be the RFU and other departments that would be engaging with the Arena Group or whoever it may be in terms of developing those outside spaces with the semi-permanent structures or temporary structures, like with the recent tournament.
But as a sporting venue, then looking at your internal offering, how creative are the people, are your clients becoming with the venues and the facilities that you've got to offer here? Is it important that you're able to also think outside of the box in terms of what you may be able to achieve with any given space within your venue?
Very much so, and I think we're all the same on this one, that we have to future-proof ourselves in terms of not just look and feel, but technology. We have to be in tune with, if not one step ahead of, what clients are looking for. And whether it's a temporary structure in terms of it needs not to look like one, or whether it's us developing space for the future, it's got to be suitable not for the now, but for the 18 months time to 2 years, and therefore we've very much got to be in tune with what customers are looking for. We certainly, as a team here, we spend a lot of time researching, listening to, talking to customers. It's a big part of us moving the business forward. And customers are very quick to tell us what they need next year. You know, it's rare that customers will just come back year after year and expect the same standards and the same themes, the same content. You know, they need to develop the content themselves. They need our help to do that, and the space sometimes helps.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm reading some information relating to the corporate responsibility commitments and that relate to the hospitality revenues within Twickenham going towards funding grassroots rugby projects. Are we right in saying, is that something that's actively happening, and how important is it that things like that happen, as well as the hospitality revenues actually bringing revenue into the organisation? How is important that at Lords as well? Is there any example of where the money that's coming in via these hospitality revenues is actually going to fund what that ground was built to do in the first place?
Well, if I can just jump in,
Yeah, you start, James. Yeah.
just ahead of you, James. The Twickenham experience is a joint venture between the RFU and Compass Group, and from the RFU point of view, as you correctly say, the money that Twickenham Experience make goes back to the RFU, and they put that directly back into grassroots rugby, which for me, I'm a coach, rugby coach at the weekend, so I get to see the other end of that cycle, which is lovely. But therefore, on the commercial side, Twickenham Experience, it's down to us really to look at spaces and work out quite creatively and quite quickly how we can make the most of that space, in order to make sure that the profits that do go back to the RFU and indeed Compass are as nice as possible, so that they can put more back into grassroots rugby. And what we're finding actually, which is really interesting, is the RFU have got some quite strong values in terms of teamwork, respect, enjoyment, discipline and sportsmanship. And when we're talking to clients now, because a lot of those values are represented around the bowl, certainly around the conference spaces, we're finding that corporate companies, it's raising their eyebrows now, because a lot of corporate companies have their own values.
Yeah.
And actually, when you look at a set of values from company to company, there's often a degree of overlap. So from an RFU values point of view, from the money going back into grassroots rugby point of view, both of which are benefiting us, but we have to work hard to make sure that we understand the client's values too, so that we can work together on that. And that goes with the space, the theming, content, again, how they deliver their event ultimately.
And are there similarities over at Lords, Nick, in the sense that the more people that can come through, even in a non-sporting sense, ultimately is going to have a benefit on raising the profile of the sport and of the venue?
Exactly. I think the more people that come into Lords and get to experience the venue, naturally it's going to get people into cricket. I think what's important to mention as well is that MCC does a lot more than own and maintain Lords Cricket Ground. All the revenue that MCC has goes into the investment in facilities. We've just completed a £3 million refurbishment on the grandstand, and we've got two major works happening. The Warner stand, which is a member and friends enclosure, is having a £25 million budget spent on that. That will be open in 2017. And the JP Morgan Media Centre's had £4 million spent on it. So there's investment in facilities, and also the money that MCC generates goes into the good of cricket. Not everybody would know that MCC are actually the governors for the laws of the game as well. So they are a very, very important part of cricket worldwide. And all the money that MCC generates goes into different projects and maintaining Lords as the premium cricket ground in the world.
And for non-cricket lovers out there, we should point out the MCC is
Marylebone Cricket Club.
Marylebone Cricket Club. And,
Yes.
and to put it into context, Lords is the ground. Marylebone Cricket Club, the MCC, are the custodian, own and run, and
Lords Cricket Ground, exactly. But from a venue perspective, people know us as Lords Cricket Ground, but I work directly for the MCC.
Excellent. And looking at the wider outside of both of these particular facilities, James Anderson, you'll have experience of working not just in sporting venues in this particular country, but sporting venues worldwide. I know Arena involved in Olympic projects. other major sporting events. How adoptive are other venues of expanding their facilities? Is this something that we've led the way in the UK quite notably?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty true. I mean, we're very fortunate. We've got businesses all around the globe, in the States, over in the Middle East, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Qatar, etc. A good example was the US Open. So this year we put a double decker up for the US Open for the first time, and they came over to see one of our buildings in action last year. And as a result of that, they went, wow, we want one of these, and we built it for them over there. So, the States are a bit behind in technology with regards to temporary infrastructure. But yeah, so I guess we are leading the way. We've won some great contracts globally, and we do deliver stuff all over the world, and a lot of that is based on the lessons that we've learned in the UK.
Is there much interaction between UK venues in terms of working with other venues from other countries and bringing them in there? James, Nick, are there examples where you've had guys from other countries come in to see what you guys are doing with your own venues to perhaps look at modelling that elsewhere?
Yeah, it has happened, certainly. For example, we met one of the cricket grounds out in Barbados, came over and did a visit to Lords. It happens quite regularly, so people do want to come over and see what we're up to and understand a little bit more about how we actually structure the business. So as much as it being about how the venue looks, it's about how we actually operate our business on a day-to-day basis. And we've always been more than happy to to share that as well.
James Lee, any examples of where Twickenham have you interacted with other stadiums? And you mentioned obviously the Rugby World Cup last year. How much of an example has been set now to other nations playing the sport?
I'm sure the Rugby World Cup has set many examples. It was a very successful World Cup. But in terms of who would be able to answer that question in terms of other countries and other venues from other countries being interested in what we're doing here, that would very much be an RFU thing. I've been here with Twickenham Experience about 14-15 months, and I'm not aware of any other venues from other countries that have come over to see our internal conference and event space. There may well have been one or two, but I'm not aware of them.
Can I ask, when you're working with clients within your own venue, how many of them do want a rugby element incorporated within their events from a creativity point of view, regardless of what their particular event is focusing on? How many of them choose to come here and then say, look, we want to incorporate an element of what you do fundamentally?
That's a great question, and I'm sure Nick's got a perspective, and indeed James too. I'm a rugby enthusiast, so I see the rugby fans first in terms of clients. I think generally speaking, we are a venue, and whilst you can see the pitch behind me and we're an amazing stadium, and I'm sure that customers do come to us for the rugby side of it. But first and foremost, we're a venue, and we've got some amazing space. Today is a good example. That's an amazing backdrop, but it's a backdrop. And unless they're going to incorporate aspects of interaction with the rugby side of it, which often happens and we encourage, but it's not essential for a lot of customers. So I don't know statistically how many people come here because we're a legendary rugby venue. I'd like to say it's many, and we talk to lots of people, and even those who aren't rugby enthusiasts that come here not because of the rugby end up often incorporating an element of it, whether it be a changing room dinner, whether it be tours after the conference. There's a whole number of things that they could get involved in.
Does that make the sales job and the marketing process of marketing your venues, Nick, quite not tricky, but you've got to be careful of the type of message that you're putting out there, because you want to attract people because you've got the right facilities regardless of event, but you also want to attract people who may have an interest in cricket and want to do it because of that?
It's a balance between the two. I think that a lot of people will use sporting venues, for example, because they're unique. So that's not necessarily just because it's a sporting venue. People want something different for their event. Quite often we find with clients, they might say, we went to Wembley Stadium last year, now we're looking at Lords, and then they might go to Twickenham the year after. They obviously have a sporting link that they want with their event, but the fact is they want a unique venue. For us as well is that we benefit as well from lots of viewing facilities overlooking the pitch, like we do here at Twickenham, and it's crazy not to use that as much as we can. It's a view better, I think, than any boardroom can offer, really, is having something like this out of the window. So we very much lead on the fact that we are Lord's Cricket Ground, the home of cricket, in our marketing. But what we need to make sure we do behind that is make sure we demonstrate our flexibility, that we're more than that, and we're ready to take on lots of different types of events and can deliver them very, very well.
We've talked with James Anderson from Marina about the idea of expanding a permanent offering, a permanent space, but how much feedback do you take from clients with your permanent spaces in terms of then what you think, right, we could adapt that, or we could develop that particular element, or we could add that element of infrastructure? Is there much development that goes on as a result of feedback from your clients?
Tremendous amount, I think. And we work very hard, as mentioned before, to solicit feedback from clients. So once an event has taken place, one of the team will go out and proactively meet the client, sit down and understand what went well and perhaps what didn't go well, or certainly if they're looking to come back, what we'd need to change. A good example of that would be the recent upgrade in the AV in our South Stand, which was a considerable investment. But we did it because we were listening to customers. We did it because customers need new technology, and in order to sort of not just keep up but get ahead, we needed to make that investment. It might be changes to menus, it might be aspects of service in terms of security. There's any number of things within an event itself that we might receive feedback on and therefore change. But I think listening to customers is fundamental, but it's then demonstrating as a result of listening what you've done. And that might not be significant investment. It might be small changes to procedures. It might be some changes to operational standards. And I think we're as good as anybody at that. I don't say that lightly. Before I joined, I spent 12 years up and down the country, as Nick will know, training and working with lots of different hospitality organisations, mainly venues. So I got to experience a lot of the service side, and I think whilst the backdrop behind me is amazing, the history behind Twickenham is amazing, the facilities that we have are amazing. Yeah, if you don't get the service right, you're in trouble, and I think the service here is as good as you'll experience. Whether it's a small meeting, whether it's a large meeting, we've got an extremely talented team here, but we work extremely hard to make sure that we get it right.
And James Lee has spoken there about how that they're taking the feedback from their clients to constantly refine their offering. And I suppose you touched on that yourself, James Anderson, earlier on in today's episode, where you spoke about getting that feedback. But how is it actually generated? How is it done when Arena go in and you'll work to adapt a facility and you're going there year on year and year? Does it become a really, really difficult task to constantly take their feedback and refine it? Does it get to a point where you think, no, we really can't do much more there?
No, not really. I think a good example this year is Aintree and at Cheltenham, actually, where we've introduced new covered grandstand seating, which dovetail behind into a separate hospitality area. They wanted to do something at Cheltenham. They wanted to do something different with a Guinness stand. We sat and talked, and we came up with some ideas. We could do this, we could do that. What do you want to do? How do you want to make it work? But it has to be different from how it's been, and actually, it has to be different from other venues around the country. So it's just continue trying to innovate and trying to give them the confidence that you can give their guests a different visitor experience and a better visitor experience than they've had somewhere else. Now, we might want to replicate that. So what we build at Cheltenham, we might want to replicate that at Aintree. But actually, as an example, it's about change now.
Nick, how much of it is an ongoing operation at Lord's to refine what you've got there, and just covering some things that James Lee said, that not just the actual infrastructure that's there and what you're offering in terms of hardware, but the refinement of the staffing and the hospitality that's delivered? How much is an ongoing process?
It's always an ongoing process. As James said, it's integral to any event. If the operation falls down, then you are in trouble. So it can be something as simple as menu rotations, having seasonal menus. It's something like that. So if somebody's coming back for 3-4 events a year, they've got a different menu at every single event. So we constantly change our menu rotations. We've got training in place for all of our staff. as well as something that's been launched called Long Room Champions. So people who achieve that level of status in terms of our staff that work events, they will get a higher rate of pay. So there's an incentive to do that and people to work hard to give the best possible levels of service. And it's listening to our customers as well. It's integral to as much to our business as I'm sure it is for James and anyone else out there in the hospitality industry. And as you said, it can be little things that make a big difference. So we've got to listen to what people are telling us.
James mentioned that there was an investment in the AV. Was it in the South Stand, James? You said a development of that. Yeah. At Lords, what are the sort of regular things that are cropping up on people's wish lists when you're working with clients that you've subsequently put into the venue to be able to meet those demands on a permanent basis?
Yeah, sure. We've got 10 meeting rooms overlooking the ground in the Tavern Stand. We've just invested in plasma screens in 5 of those, which get used the most for events. So rather than having to bring in a pull-up screen or a plasma screen, there's something built in for people already. The Thomas Lord Suite's our main conference room, so that's got AV built in there in terms of, there's a PA system in there, there's access to complimentary microphones. I think what's really important for sporting venues is to make sure that we're giving them the same, if not more, than what other conference venues are actually offering them. Make it easy for people to book. We shouldn't be making life for the event organiser more difficult by coming to a sporting venue. We need to give them access to the same equipment that they're getting everywhere else, plus give them the uniqueness of the venue to hopefully get them to come back again.
There's a real opportunity here, isn't there? Because when you look back to the traditional hotel conference suite that maybe companies would have used in years gone by, I would argue, my opinion would be that there was a complacency that set in for a period of time whereby the big hotels and their conference suites had a monopoly on these events before people really started to think outside the box and look at these other facilities. What all three of you have done is raise the bar that little bit, so the more traditional quote-unquote venues are now playing a little bit of catch-up. It is ultimately that just driving forward the standard as the industry as a whole.
One of the things, sorry, May. One of the things that we out of our offering now is like a double or triple decker temporary building that is completely flexible. So it can be so the top floor can be a theatre style, middle floor can be conference rooms, bottom floor can be catering, and then it's all completely changeable. So from one day you can have a conference in it, then the next day you could have it as you could have a wedding in it. You could have and selling that sort of thing to a venue, give them a completely flexible space to actually see if the revenues are going to work. So yes, they'll spend some money on the temporary building, but as I say, you don't have the ongoing costs of the maintenance, etc. So if you can prove that model in a venue, then that gives them the confidence that if they did then want to go and build that particular unit in permanent, they then can, because they've sort of concreted the revenues.
What are the sort of, when we're looking at the types of events that are coming in here, what types of event are you getting in? What's the spectrum of client that you're dealing with from one extreme to the other, if you follow me? Are there any examples that we can reference to perhaps highlight the 2 venues that we've got in the studio today and what you can deliver?
Yeah, I'll kick that one off, James. Okay. Lots of different types of events. I think very much where I think we are in our strongest position is in terms of delivering lunches, dinners and receptions in the pavilion building. That's the iconic part of Lords that people resonate with. So a lot of the events that we have naturally will take place within there. I mentioned the Thomas Lord Suite earlier. That's our main conference room. But again, we do lots of dinners in there, exhibitions, wine tastings. We have 3 outside areas, one of which on top of the pavilion overlooking the ground. So we do lots of summer events up there as well. It's a huge spectrum. I know it is at Twickenham as well. There aren't many different types of events that we can't take. We just obviously need to keep an eye on our capacity. But beyond the types of events that we do, it's a huge spectrum.
And James, at Twickenham, I know the sheer scale of the operation that you've got here in terms of the size of the venue gives you great scope, but could you perhaps highlight some of the different types of event that you're actually accommodating here?
Unfortunately, it's going to be much of the same as Nick's just said. We can accommodate from 2 to 1,000 people in lots of different formats, in lots of different ways. And that's a lovely challenge to have as a team. There aren't too many customers that we have to turn away because, 1, we haven't got the size, or 2, we haven't got the right kind of space. Mm-hmm. That's not to say we're all things to all people. In terms of the types of events, certainly conference and meetings is our staple. but around that we punctuate it with many banquets, private dining. We've got some fantastic private dining spaces directly behind me in the new West Stand. As an example, we've got an absolute gem of a Twickenham cellar, which lends itself to sort of executive private dining for small numbers. But likewise, we pride ourselves on big numbers. You know, from a hospitality point of view, we do thousands of covers on match day, and therefore we lend ourselves to the big events too. So it's a huge question. We could spend a long time breaking that down, because I don't think there are too many customers that we would turn away because we couldn't do either the space or we couldn't get creative enough with the thinking to help them deliver a great event. At least I'd like to think not.
Is a lot of the new business driven by inbound inquiries, people who are perhaps looking for that different type of venue that Nick, you mentioned earlier, or is a lot of your focus done on outbound marketing in order to generate new contacts and new business?
It's both. We spend a lot of time making sure that when we're capturing inquiries that we're dealing with them in the best possible way, we're dealing with them accurately in a bespoke way, giving the client all the information that they want. So we take a lot of time making sure we get all the detail and actually understand why they want to use Lords as a possible venue for their event. That's one part of it, and which is really important for us. And then obviously it's then make sure you're looking in the right areas to try and gain new business, and it's that balance between the two. You know, I'm sure James is in the same position. We're very fortunate being iconic venues. We naturally do get some inquiries that come through to us, but it doesn't mean that we can get to our budget every year just by doing that. We need to work hard and make sure we're trying to, you know, raise the awareness of Lords as an events venue, as well as being the home of cricket.
Absolutely.
I'm just linking that back to your previous question, actually, and not wanting to alienate James at this point, but I think the drive-in business, certainly the incoming business that we're experiencing, yes, it's a lot of energy put into outbound marketing. Yes, it's a lot of customer service in terms of the incoming inquiries. But I do think there's been a step change over the last 10 or 20 years from traditional venues as you described them. Yeah. And in actual fact, if you just look at the volume of venues that there are now, our local village hall in the town that I live in, you can rent out for children's parties now for sort of 25 quid. So, you know, we've got to be alive. And I think when it comes to the way we acquire new customers, it has to be dependent on us to go and find them. But it would certainly be true to say a lot of the customers that might be inquiring with us are doing so because they're not fed up, but they're tired of the same venue, which might be traditional, and therefore they're looking for a new offering, something new, something quirky, something different.
That dovetails well into what we do. For what we do, we get a lot of inquiries from venues that need extra space or need something different, and they come to say, can you help us deliver this event, whatever that may be. So there may be that, I'll use your village hall analogy, they may have the space to do the party, but actually they want to do something much bigger, they want to do something different, and we can, you know, we help these venues deliver that event for them.
Have you seen that increase because you've obviously got established relationships with a number of major sporting venues, but have you seen an increase in recent years of other sporting venues coming to you saying, look, we're playing catch up here, what can you do to help us?
It's not just sporting venues, it's venues full stop.
Right.
Areas that have got space, you know, there's a huge amount of venues around now. There's more venues now than there's ever been. And there's a lot of them that want to do something different. You know, they may have some space. They may want to do a conference. They may want to host a tennis match or whatever. So we'll build we can build the building for them. We can build the seating for them. Pretty much. So yeah, all the time it's just grown and grown and grown.
With that growth, has it made your jobs more difficult, Nick and James? How tough is it to compete when there are a growing number of venues becoming available?
I think it's the most competitive the marketplace has ever been, and not least of which we're both in London, which has always been a very competitive marketplace. But I think that's a great challenge to have, and that, again, is why the history of both the venues here, I think the service, the fact that we don't have rules, we don't have the same rules anyway that some of the traditional conference centres and certainly the hotel chains have, which means we've got more flexibility, which means we can make quicker decisions. Yeah. If we need to work around a client's request, then we can do that, and we can do that much quicker than most other venues, and I think that's appreciated.
Just to turn on its head slightly, a question that I asked earlier about any communication that you may have with other venues internationally, are you seeing an increase in international visitors coming to use your venues for the events that you are hosting? Obviously, with this increase in venues, it will ultimately drive the standards, hopefully upwards, because there is more competition, and one would hope that is ultimately attracting business from further afield. Is that the case with both of your venues?
I'd say from international business, it's growing slightly. I think cricket and rugby actually similarly probably don't have the same kind of awareness that football does around the world. So we need to find out exactly why people want to be coming, potentially to experience our venues, just understand that a little bit more. We get a lot of overseas business that comes across, but it tends to be from the cricket playing nations, from India and Australia in particular. So certainly I think more that we can do in terms of other areas, perhaps in Europe, a little bit more in terms of trying to get some more business from those areas.
Sorry, James, go far away.
I was just going to say, from our point of view, we are probably seeing an increase, albeit steady, in terms of international events here, but probably not necessarily rugby related, but more because we're pretty close to Heathrow, and because as events grow, and they are growing, and companies become a bit more international, you need to have events or hold your events in hubs, and we've certainly fit into that in terms of our proximity to Heathrow. Our job as a sales team is to try and make sure they come that little bit further than those hotels you referred to, that the big ballrooms with the 400 bedrooms upstairs.
James Anderson, you're working at a slightly different stage to the other guys in the studio, but how aware are you of international visitors to UK-based events that you're helping to facilitate? Are you noticing an increase in that?
We don't really track that. For us, it's we're providing a service to a venue, which is a temporary infrastructure service. I can't really answer that. It's not something that we would
be aware of.
We're not aware of that. No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, other than obviously Rugby World Cup here, huge amount of international visitors.
Yeah, indeed.
Obviously, but I would suggest for most of the tournaments that we do work for, I can't really answer it. I wouldn't know.
Let's just mention the fact that when we're going to tweet some links out to all of the organisations that have been involved in today's episode, so that if any of our listeners want to get in touch with you directly to find out a little bit more about you, what you can offer, what you can bring to the table, if they've got any questions directly for you, we will tweet some links from the @TalkingEvents Twitter account, so people can head over to that page and then get in touch with the organisations that have been here, which today has been James Anderson from the Arena Group. James, thank you very much for joining us today. Nick Kenton from Lord's Cricket Ground. Nick, thank you very much for being a part of today's episode. James Lee from the Twickenham Experience. Great to have you on board today, and thanks again to your team and your staff here at the stadium for their hospitality in hosting us the last couple of days to record these episodes. As I mentioned, if anybody wants to get in touch with the podcast, use the @TalkingEvents Twitter handle to submit any questions, comments on today's episode. You can watch it on the Event Industry News YouTube channel and via eventindustrynews.co.uk. If you're watching this, you can also subscribe to the podcast via iTunes. It just leaves me to wrap up and say that my name's James Dixon. You've been listening to Talking Events.